a lot of issues that I see volunteers post on social media really have a root problem. And the root problem comes down to communications, right? And communications is always such a challenge with any organization and with any group of people. It's not only what are you saying and how you say it and how it's received, but in today's world, like what medium? Like you're talking about, what are the different communication channels that you have to check on a daily basis?
Me,
And
personally?
yeah, yeah,
Oh man. Well, obviously the very first thing I do is pick up my phone in the morning and go through a whole list of apps, and we were talking a little bit about it. I look at all the social media channels where I even receive messages, so Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Um we talked about GroupMe, we talked about all kinds of app messaging platforms. And then somebody just commented with a great one that we didn't talk about, but Slack is another one I know a lot of people use. Email. I
a
mean, what
Slack.
about you, Anthony?
hmm Yeah, so what I've tried to do is I try to keep the number of things that I have to check to a minimum. I think that's what everyone's looking for, right? Simplicity, right? And put it in my line of sight. It's somewhere that's it's easy for me to access and get to. And so yeah, those app platforms are great because they do some great tools that you can't do with other platforms. Most of them are free, especially with the volume that you're dealing with the usually Cub Scout Pack or Den. They usually have a free version. It's not until you get to the hundreds that they usually charge, because that's usually where, that's how they filter out personal use to commercial use of items. But when we're talking about communications in a pack or den, I want to give some tips and tricks from what I've learned personally, but also what we've learned from the field from volunteers. And so my first biggest suggestion when it comes to communicating with your den or pack is to have a conversation about it, right? It's almost like step one. Sit down with all the parents, if possible, all at once. And if not, have a methodology, be able to discuss and ask them questions like I just asked Gina. So what apps do you use? Which ones do you like? You may find that school systems, sports teams, or other youth activities that you're involved with, they may already have a platform that the majority of parents already have. They're already there. They're in that space. And so maybe you may not be familiar with it, but if the majority of parents are, that's an opportunity for you to learn something new and move in that direction. So my personal experience with that was we, in our Scouts BSA troops, we were talking about our communications plan. And a communications plan is simply just how do we communicate to our parents? Right? How do we communicate to our leaders, and how do we communicate with our youth? Like, we have a procedure in place. And we talked about Scout Book. We had moved all of our stuff onto Scout Book. So our calendar, our reminders, our RSVP, Scout Book does all that. And so we steered away from platforms that don't have that utility. Now, Scout Book, you can text and set up instant reminders and those types of things. But what we found that Scout Book didn't have was, what if a parent is at the meeting place on the wrong night or wrong time, or on a day that we change the meeting, right? And so they need a quick ping. They need a quick answer. And instead of just trying to ping one adult leader like the Scoutmaster, right? We set up a GroupMe account with all the parents and leaders. And so now if someone's got a question that needs an instant reaction, they can post it on that GroupMe, and it goes out to everyone, and then someone can reply. And when someone replies, everyone sees that question has been answered. So that was, to us, how we decided to use that tool. And so that goes to another, key component to developing a good communications plan with your pack or den, which is identifying what platform is going to be used for what types of messages, right? Because I think, I don't know, Gina, you probably never had this happen to you, but I mean, have you ever had like a group text email or text that just would not end, and like it only involved really 2 or 3 people? Isn't it?
Absolutely. And you mute it or you hide it and you stop looking at it.
Right. And that's an important, And that brings me to, one of the things that what we kind of have learned and want to share with people is that email has become a less impactful and way to communicate with anyone in today's world, because we've set so many filters up, and it just over time we got tired of all the jokes and the cartoons and the memes, and so we tune it out, and it's really easy for us to tune out an email. And even with like e-newsletters, when you send stuff out, if you have a 12% open rate, that's like huge. So it's really not an effective communication tool. So, if you're using email today, I would strongly recommend that you look at switching to another platform that's a more direct platform. And that's where these things, like we mentioned them earlier, these are brand names, by the way. So these are GroupMe, Band, WhatsApp, and Slack. Those are four that are just off the top of my head that I've heard people use, and they use those by simply just downloading it onto your device or smartphone. Most of them also have a desktop application that you can download as well, and it's just a quick instant message type of system that you can set up parameters. You can create groups within groups. Those types of things makes it easy to be able to communicate messages that need to happen, that people need right away. Again, instant messages, right? But we also don't. One of the platforms of building a good communications model within your pack or den is what is your one source of truth? So, for example, in the national organization, our one source of truth is the website, scouting.org. If it's not on scouting.org, then it's probably a rumor, right? It's probably not factual. So we try to make sure that everything, that any updates, anything that's current, is reflected on the website. And that's why, for example, the Guide to Safe Scouting and frequently asked questions about safety measures and health procedures and COVID, that those things are all updated, they're there in one source. So then what we can do is use other channels like Facebook or email messages and link people directly to that one source of truth instead of trying to duplicate that somewhere else. So again, what is your one source of truth for your unit? Is it Scout Book? So our Scout Book in our troop, for example, that's our one source of truth for what's going on. That's the calendar. We don't have a Scout Book calendar, a Google Calendar, and another calendar that's in another app, right? So if you see that you're using multiple platforms like that, have that conversation with parents and adults and other leaders about, okay, how can we get this down into one very useful tool? So what are things that do we have stuff from the field that's questions?
Yes,
from
we just have a couple comments, and I love it because they kind of go along with what you're saying. Anthony, it's easy for us to feel like, oh, I don't use X, Y, or Z, but it's so much easier if you are a leader to meet people where they're at. It may seem like, oh, I don't want to get this new app that they've got, but you are going to have a way easier time getting yourself onto that app than trying to get a whole group of parents to some app that they've never heard of. So I love these. Valerie is not a big fan of using Facebook for communication. So that's just good input that, everybody's got their different methods. And it kind of depends on, like you said, where your certain messaging belongs in certain places, because we wouldn't be reaching you guys right now if we weren't using Facebook. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation. Sherilyn as mentioned an app I've never heard of called Remind. And Michael, I think
Yes.
you're kidding, is suggesting Morse code. So, it's a good reminder that things have evolved for sure.
They certainly have, right? But it goes back to, again, that key tip of having all your parents together or having a way to just simply ask the question, right? What do you currently use and what do you currently check? And we're starting to use this term a lot in Cub Scouting called line of sight. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify what are your parents' line of sight. What do they see and look at every day? And that's where you want to be. And I love that you said that, as a leader, our job is to meet people where they're at, not try to merge them onto some other kind of weird platform that you found that you like, that you use for professional services, and that you're not going to be the one that changes. So that kind of, I've got like 4 tips that I have for folks when we talk about communications. Aside from asking your parents, right? You need to, and you need to do that every year, right? We have new parents joining every year, and technology changes so much that if the school system changes their communication system that everyone was on, or some other youth group that other folks are involved in, be willing to pivot. And that's point number 2. After you get the input from your parents, be willing to explore and look at these other things that you may not be familiar with. And so in that case, you're the one who needs to change, not trying to change all the parents. That's usually a lot easier road than trying to change everyone else. And then establish that one source of truth, right? Where, if I've got a question, where can I go to confirm? And think about the types of questions that parents would have, right? So usually date, time, and location of meetings. What do I need to bring? If it's an outing or special activity, what kind of resources do I need to have? So does your platform allow for those types of things? And I'll keep on plugging Scoutbook because it really is a great tool that has that ability to do all those things, as far as being able to put a list of what you need for that weekend, and keep that updated. And if the parents are using the scouting app to track their child's rank advancement, the first thing that pops up is the calendar, right? So then again, that goes a key communication tool that happens within that. But the one thing that Scoutbook doesn't do, right, which is I'm stuck, I'm in the parking lot, and I could have sworn the den leader said that we were meeting at 6 o'clock tonight, and no one's here, and it's 6:05, right? So when that happens, what tool do you have that a parent can pop onto, ask the question, and get an instant response? Or what resource can they go to check to make sure what's going on, right? That one source of truth. And if you've got multiple calendars floating out there in different platforms, that becomes very confusing for everyone. So if you got it on Facebook as a calendar, and you've got it on, Microsoft, calendar, and then you also have got the Google Calendar, get it all to one source. And then be persistent, right? That's the last point that I always have. Be persistent. Keep on asking, keep on updating, test it out, and see if it works. Like, we didn't know if doing CubChatLive would work, but we keep on doing it. We did it, and it worked well the first couple of times. Said, was it an anomaly because it's bright, new and shiny, and it continues to pull a good audience and good viewership. So we're going to continue this source of communication. If we find a better way where more people are at, then we'll switch to that. We'll pivot, right, and we'll respond to that. I've got also kind of a list of, and would like to know of people who are watching. Like, here's my question to you: what is the most effective communication tool that you use? I'm not talking about an app. I'm just saying, what have you found is the best way to communicate things to parents in your Packard den?
That's such a good question, and people are already answering it. We also have a poll going right now on Facebook. You guys can vote what's your preferred method for communication. I love that you emphasize how important it is to poll your parents and continue to poll the parents in your unit, because we're seeing more than ever people's preferences on these things rapidly change. Like, you could make the right decision for this year for a communication channel to really focus on, and in a year, it's going to change. It will change. People are getting to new apps, or they get new phones, or, the iOS updates, and people just use different things. You mentioned how, what is the go-to tool when you are in a pinch and you need maybe like direct contact with a parent, or a parent needs direct contact with you quickly. And I think Jason has a good suggestion on that. He says they like to do the old-fashioned way over the phone. It's personal, and you always get the message. There's never any doubt that the message was received. I mean, a good old phone call. When I get a phone call, I know that there's some importance behind answering it. Somebody needs something from me. I like that suggestion.
I love that too. In fact, I've got a list of, I would say, preferred methods of communication. Like the ways that I have found, no matter what situation I'm in, works the best to communicate with people. And I found that a monthly parent meeting, like it's a standing meeting. So like every third Tuesday of the month at this time, we're all going to meet at this location. And if you can't make it, then let's have a Zoom call. Let's have some kind of other way that the pandemic has given us this new ability to learn how to incorporate technology and still be able to communicate. And so that monthly meeting allows for people to know what's going on, have conversations. And again, if it's a parent meeting, not a leader meeting where it's just the leadership and you're kind of excluding parents, but really an open forum meeting where parents have a chance to give feedback, to be part of it, to volunteer. When they see that you need help, you're going to get a better chance of someone volunteering because they feel comfortable and they're building a relationship with you. And so my second one is the phone call, right? That is, if you can't see someone in person and you can't, and I would even count this like a video chat or a quick phone call, something that's a two-way communication where you can see the person's face, you can hear the tone and diction. And that's one of the reasons I don't like email as a primary source of information, because the way you say something really has an impact on how that message is being delivered. And so if you find that your email is, my general rule, if my email is longer than 2 sentences, I'm probably going to pick up the phone and call the person. Because once I get past that, there's too much room for misinterpretation of my intent. And I'm trying to be nice, and it's sometimes hard to say something nice to come across in an email when you have to say something that's specific, right? It may come off bossy, or people interpret things differently. My third one is, again, I'm going to promote it, keep on promoting because it's a huge, and it's free, Scoutbook, the Scoutbook calendar. You can set up meeting reminders, and it also has an RSVP function. So you can set it up so that if you're having a special den activity or a camp out and you want people to sign up to know who's coming, you can do it right there in the Scoutbook app. Super, super easy. And then I would say 4 on the list is where we get to what we've been talking about. Messaging apps, text messages. Those are good communication pieces where not only do you want to have a way for parents to reach out to leadership to get an answer real quick, but there's also might be times where you need to message a change out to parents right away. And that's a really effective way to be able to do that. And most of those services allow you to see if someone actually has read the message or not, or opened the message. And that really helps you understand if parents are really receiving messages and getting that. Having a PAC website, those aren't a thing of the past, right? Really, designing your website for a specific intent is the website. I would see your website as your external communication device to people who aren't necessarily already in the PAC, but a way for people to find you, right? And so think about that communication. Where are you communicating about your PAC on your PAC website? Michael Ramsey has a great presentation about, the address that was in Be a Scout was like a vacant field, or, it didn't really match up and didn't really portray the PAC the way that they wanted to be portrayed. So having that PAC website is still important, and I would add that to the communication piece. And then, we always make announcements at PAC or den meetings. I have always found that if I make an announcement, I need to make sure I follow that up with a second piece of communication. And that's where it can be an email, even a printed document that gets handed out. Don't think that, and Gina, I would love to get your insight on this. How many times do you have to say something for someone to acknowledge that they heard it?
I mean, probably 3+ times, and multiple communication channels. One usually doesn't work. we talk a little bit about, or we've talked a little bit about with, like, to me, I think of email as like a megaphone. It's like, I need to give you a bunch of information. You might need to have it handy in the future, but I am not expecting that we're going to have a good dialogue, or that I don't have to remind you again 2 times.
Yeah, emails are great as a follow-up to a previous conversation. It's also a very poor way to build a relationship. And so, you really want to build a relationship with your parents. And email is really just, again, when I became Cub Master, which wasn't too long ago, but we've had a lot of changes in way we can communicate and options we have in today's world. But I was ready. I had this email service set up called Constant Contact, and I had these really good-looking emails that had our pack logo on it, and we had pictures and hyperlinks, and it was a really dynamic newsletter. I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome, right? And so I sent it out, and then like maybe the second month that our pack was around, we had a parent meeting, and I asked everyone, I said, are you getting the emails? And literally some parents were like, let me check. And I realized that not everyone has a job where they have to check their email constantly. Like my job requires me to be constantly connected, checking my messages all the time. But not everyone has a role like that. Not everyone has jobs or careers that require them to be that connected all the time. So they check their email maybe once a week, right? Or not at all, or who knows, right? So that's where that conversation, when we ask the parents, we say, okay, if you're not reading your emails, then what works best for you? And that's where text messages came out. They said, oh yeah, if you text me, I'll read it. And in fact, that when we learned about that, we found a parent who agreed to do all the text messages for meeting reminders. And so we would just text out to the parents, hey, don't forget, tomorrow night, 6 o'clock is the den meeting or pack meeting. And what we found very different from a text message from an email, and I think these other services that you see, these new apps, the GroupMe and Band, you get instant reactions. Like the text messages, people would say, yes, we're looking forward to it. We'll see you then. Like they were responding to the text where they weren't even reading an email. And in today's world, these apps and other messaging services, people can, they can do the little thumbs up, they can do the heart, those are just ways that they can acknowledge that they received the message. And that is vitally important when we're talking about communications.
Yeah, so I think too, like, I don't fully subscribe to that there's these huge generational gaps, but with communication, sometimes we really see it because it's only been in the last half a decade that we get this instant communication. Like, we expect to hear back from you right away. It used to be like, give people 2 days, you might not hear from somebody for 2 days,
Yes.
but they'll see it. It's different now, and that's why I'm glad you touched on text messaging. It seems like that is just like a standard for, you need a quick response. You want to make sure somebody sees something, whether they're in a meeting or, it just seems like it's a great multitask tool. So people usually see their text if you really need to get a hold of them. We have tons of comments. We have a few minutes left, but just to read a couple of you guys' comments, the poll results are very interesting, Anthony. People like,
Right.
so 52% of our viewers voted for email, which maybe that's because it's just the standard, like, yes, maybe it's not your go-to always use this communication vehicle, but you kind of always have to integrate it in, especially when we're talking about checklists or document attachments, what
Yeah,
have
and
you.
if you're doing a mass mailing, I would suggest to make sure that if you are using email, right, and again, the key step here is to talk to your parents. Now, if you know that all your parents would prefer the email, right, because they told you that, and they're all reading it, and you know what your open rate is, that's great, right? That's fantastic, and that's working for your pack. By no means do we want to say if something's working for your pack that you need to change for change's sake. No, you should continue to do what you're doing if it's working. But if it's not, or it's not being as effective as you like, maybe there's these other opportunities that you have aside from email.
Right. So 27% of our viewers voted in favor of texting, and 18% voted in favor of social media. So really interesting.
Okay.
I'm definitely in the texting camp. I think that that's pretty cool. Antonio says they use simple group text. that works best for them. Great point. Alan says their most
Especially,
effective method of, oh, go ahead, Anthony.
well, I was thinking the sometimes it's hard to find, like, if you have a big pack, right? Sometimes you have to find a third party vendor to be able to send out a mass text to everyone. But if you're a den leader or an assistant den leader, or you're part of a den, that's usually easy because that's usually less than 10 people. And so that's really most, you can almost do that manually. It's that easy.
That's a very good point. And we're focused on Cub Scouting right now, but there's a whole other set of challenges and things to keep in mind, and we love your comments on it if you are working with an older unit as well, because sometimes you have to communicate with your officers, and we know you can't just be messaging them directly. You've got to have their either
Right.
parents or another adult on these communications. So I think that's maybe where like something like GroupMe is super helpful. Alan says their most effective method of communicating is word of mouth. They have meetings the first Wednesday of every month, so everyone, can remember that. But it's really helpful when he and his adult leaders keep a smile on their face and communicate in person, and they don't communicate too much. That's a good point.
That is a good point. And Alan, I love that because that is my number one preferred method of communicating with a pack or a den. It's in person, eye to eye, face to face. People are more likely to ask questions. And again, they can see your reaction to that, your tone and diction. The conversation can bring up a whole different way of saying, well, why aren't you people opening your email? Compared to, well, why is it that you're not opening your email? You see the two different tones in my voice carry two very different sentiments. And if I just type that in an email, which one of those two are you going to hear in your mind? And that's why I'm not real crazy about email as a primary source of communication. Again, it's great as a secondary. It's great to say, hey, okay, you're in person. We're gonna tell people, hey, we're gonna email this out to everyone. So look out for that. But if the only way you're communicating with parents in your dinner pack is only through email, it may not be as effective as some of these other methods that we talked about.
Yeah, I got to agree with that. I know we are really short in time, but I've got two more comments to read. So the first one is Antonio asking, does the Scout Book app work? And the second is Debbie saying that they love the Scout Book app. That's what they use to communicate. So there's your answer, Antonio. And Anthony here can tell you it definitely works. And it's got a lot of functionality that speaks just to this topic of communication.
It does, and the calendar function, I would say, again, when it comes to communication, right? Again, Scoutbook does have holes, right? It's not a perfect tool, and we are constantly improving that product as we look at how people are using it. And my unit found that the gap was it's hard to go on Scoutbook and mass email or message everyone something that they need to know right away. For example, if we're on the road as a troop and we know that we're an hour away from the parking lot so that parents can leave their home and be in the parking lot in time to pick up their child from the weekend camp out. That's a common tool that most units do, and that notification doesn't really work well in Scoutbook that we found. And then we talked to the parents, and most of the parents were already on GroupMe. They already used that as a messaging device, and so we just created a troop GroupMe where we have one that's for all parents, and then we have one that's just the adult leadership within the troop. So that tool for us was a lot easier and quicker. But our one source of truth is Scoutbook, right? That's where's my son's advancement? It's in Scoutbook. What's the calendar? What are we doing next week? It's in Scoutbook, right? All those things we keep there. So that's our one source of truth.
Yep. Well, I'm glad that we're touching on the Scout Book, and there's obviously a lot of crossover in our comments. Asif and Heather both mentioned WhatsApp. I've seen WhatsApp mentioned a few times. Asif also mentions Ban, and he summarizes this conversation well. One mode is not enough. They have at least 3 generations in their audience who may like a medium of communication different from others. So I think that really kind of hits the nail on the head and summarizes a lot of what this conversation is about. Any closing thoughts, Anthony?
Yeah, that used to be the marketing tool. They used to say that you have to a general audience, right? You have to get your message in front of them at least 7 times for them to acknowledge that you're sending out a message, right? 7 times. That has now actually increased to 12 times because we're bombarded with so many different mediums and different channels that you now even have to do it more. Now, that number changes for people who are invested or part of a group. They're expecting the message. Of course, that changes, and that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about parents of Cub Scouts. They know that they're in Cub Scouts. It's not, coming from a stranger, those types of things. So again, I would make sure that the key element, take away from any of this when we're talking about communicating with your pack or den, is to start the conversation first every year, and ideally that would be, I would say before new parents join, because when new parents join, they want to be told what to do. And so you want to be able to hand them, hey, this is how we communicate. We want you to download this app, if it's an app or whatever it might be. And this is how we communicate these types of things. So if you ever had any questions, that's your go-to device. They would rather have that than when they first join, you're asking them, well, what do you like and what do you prefer? Because then it makes it look like you're not organized. And that's kind of a little turnoff for parents in their mind when it looks like you're still trying to build your communications plan, but asking them how they prefer to be communicated with is expected. And then that you can also kind of track any movements from one type of platform to another. That's the real key. And to check it, right? Every month, just do a quick check-in with parents to see, is it working? Are you getting the messages? Do we need to change? Do we need to shift? And be willing to be the one that has to say, all right, I love my email, but it seems like I'm the only one. I need to shift gears and get to something else.
Exactly. You gotta, like we said, meet them where they're at and ask the parents often. Anthony, this was such a good topic. I think this is one that we could do again, to be honest. I think we totally should because our audience has got all kinds of thoughts.
Great. Well, yeah, and absolutely. Well, topics for Cub Chat Live are generated by the audience, right? I do look at, I post on social media, I ask for people's input, and sometimes I get it right in the comment box from the post. Sometimes people email me or they message me, or I get some other kind of way of looking at, and then I also look at the feeds that are happening in some of the social media areas and channels to see what people are talking about, what's a hot topic. So the more you let us know, the more you share, the more you comment, the better sense we get of what kind of topic we are going to cover for next week.
Exactly right. So keep on commenting. We will be back next Friday at 2 p.m. Central for another great Cub Chat Live. Until then, Anthony, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Gina. Bye, everyone.